Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to our network meeting on adaptation and resilience. I don't know if you just want to say hello just while we're waiting for others to join us. Welcome Rachel and Sonia and Chris and Mrs. Hall. Welcome Emma. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. And now I can't see anybody, so okay, we'll get started in a minute. So just for the purposes of today, we are recording, and we're going to send out the recording afterwards. So if you don't want to be on that recording, just because we might use clips and send it to a wider audience, please feel free to turn off your cameras. I'll go through the agenda in a minute, but at the end of the hour after the presentations, we do have an opportunity to do some networking. So it'd be great if we'll stop the recording, and then if you put your camera back on, and then we can go out into breakout rooms and have a chat about adaptation and resilience. So I hope that's okay with everyone. Louisa, for some reason, I can't see anything, so I cannot see the chat. Hopefully, just interrupt me if anything pops up, and I will answer questions as and when.
Will do.
Lovely, thank you. Great. So my name's Rebecca Elston-Haynes. I am the school sustainability lead for Suffolk councils. So I work on behalf of all councils, and I'm joined today by Louisa, who is the school sustainability support officer. I hope I've got that all right. And together we're leading different programs for both secondary and primary schools to support them with sustainability. If this is your first network meeting, we hold the network meetings every half term, and this year we've done them on different themes. So far we've done climate education, decarbonisation, green careers, and we're doing adaptation and resilience now. We've got a biodiversity one coming up in June, so I definitely encourage you to attend that. And then we will have something on climate action planning towards the end of the year. Great, so this is the agenda for today. So I will introduce you to everyone as we go, but we're going to start off with an update from me from the Suffolk Sustainable Schools Network, and then we're going to talk to Deborah, who's here from RAFT, Retrofit Action for Tomorrow. And then we're going to be hearing from Holly, who works at Thoughtbox, which is a sort of curriculum, resources and support for schools. And then we've got Luciana from Let's Go Zero, who is here to talk about climate action advice and adaptation in particular. And then we'll have the opportunity for some networking and some breakout rooms. Lovely. Okay, so just some news to start, really. We wanted to just shout about the latest achievement that we've made, which is Our Schools, Our World. So we were recruiting quite intensively for this over the last few months, and we had our training, I think not last week, the week before, and we ended up getting 15 schools and 65 participants joined us at St Joseph's in Ipswich for 3 days worth of training. So we looked at sustainability leadership on the first day, we looked at curriculum and greening the curriculum on the second day, and then we had a whole day dedicated to climate action planning with support from Let's Go Zero. It was fantastic, really great day. A lot of the participants came out absolutely buzzing and really excited to implement sustainability within their school afterwards. So we're hoping to run another cohort, maybe in the new year. So if you didn't manage to take part in that program, please don't worry, we will be running it again. But we're looking forward to working with our 15 schools over the course of the next 6 months and really trying to drive sustainability across the whole school. And we'll let you know how it goes. Another event that we're hosting in just under 3 weeks' time is the Sustainability in Education Conference. So again, we've been shouting about this for a while, and I'm hoping some of you on the call today are coming. But there's still time to register. Louisa will put the link into the chat. So that's taking place on the 2nd of April at St Joseph's College again in Ipswich. And I just wanted to flash up the workshops on there because I'm really excited. We've got Climate Fresque training, which is kind of it's an interactive game where you look at the climate science and you then talk about ways to kind of mitigate climate. So we're doing that with Climate Clarity. That's going to be a really great workshop. And then we've got Let's Go Zero and the Climate Ambassadors. So they're going to support operational leaders and sustainability leads to look at climate action planning. And then we've got a community climate action group who are going to be talking about how schools can collaborate with the community to kind of embed sustainability initiatives and support action on climate and nature. And then from Suffolk County Council, we've got the behavioural science team coming, and they're going to look at, how behaviour change insights can support you in delivering more effective change within school. So a really great workshop. I've done something with them myself, and I think they're really fantastic at what they do. So I definitely encourage you to take part in that. And then we've also got Learning Through Landscapes and the National Education Nature Park, who are going to come and talk about greening the curriculum, nature connectedness, and the importance of outdoor learning. And they're also going to be looking at adaptation as well in terms of developing the school site. So a fantastic day. Please do consider signing up. Okay, and then I just wanted to plug a couple of initiatives. This is for secondary only, but we are offering free energy audits. I do talk about this in every meeting that we have, but just for those that are just joining us. So we offer a school visit. Basically, we gather all of your data, and I say we, it's our partner Groundwork. They formulate a report that has like payback figures and all the different things you can implement to reduce your carbon emissions, but also to save money. And then we meet with you after that. We go through the report, and we also offer you support with your climate action plans. So we've had quite a few schools go through that process, but we still have some audits available. So do get in touch. I will ask Louisa to put the link for the Microsoft form into the chat, and we'll always include it in our newsletter, so you can sign up that way. And that for those schools that have had their energy audit and have then gone and written a decarbonisation plan and started implementing it, we are offering a free year of Energy Sparks. So we covered this in our decarbonisation meeting, but Energy Sparks is a kind of interactive platform that allows you to look at how much energy you're using like in the moment. So it's half-hourly data, and basically because it's an interface that students can also engage with, often schools have used it to really look at behaviour change and how they can minimize their energy use, and have been able to save vast amounts of money. And it tells you how much money you're saving because it is connected with your utility company. So really great opportunity for 5 schools. We're hoping, if that is successful, it's something we can advocate for more schools. But yeah, please consider having an energy audit, and then you can apply for that. And there's also, for secondaries, there is a new project where selected schools will be asked if they want to put solar panels on the roofs of their schools. And I can go into that more details if you want to contact us. At the moment, the project hasn't quite got going, so I don't want to talk about it too much. But yeah, that's on the horizons for secondary schools as well. And a couple of competitions that I wanted to make you aware of. So the first is the biodiversity competition from the Greenest County, which is basically all Suffolk councils. So they, as the part of their Suffolk Youth Climate Conference, they're inviting those schools that are attending, so you will know if you are attending, the opportunity to enter a biodiversity competition where there's up to £2,000 available for you to implement your plan. So basically, you're coming up with a biodiversity plan for your site. You submit your plans, and then if you win, you get £2,000 to make them happen. And you also get to meet Steve Backshall, which is exciting, at the conference. Unfortunately, that is only secondary, and it is for the schools that are attending the conference. So I did want to include another opportunity, which is the Department for Education the Sustainability Award. So this is up to £2,500 towards some kind of sustainability project. So it doesn't have to be biodiversity. It could be energy as well. Louisa's going to put the link to that. Unfortunately, the website isn't great. So if you go, there's a load of awards that you can apply for. If you go scroll right to the bottom and look for this icon, the Department for Education Sustainability Award, click on that, and it gives you all of the different kind of requirements for entering that competition. But again, quite a sizable amount that could support you and your students in making change happen. Okay, and another opportunity I wanted to make you aware of, there's an open letter that's been signed by 150 leading climate scientists and academics, but it's open to anyone to sign, and it's a letter to Bridget Phillipson, MP, obviously Secretary for Education, kind of asking that the curriculum review really considers implementing improvements in climate education and sustainability education. I wanted to advertise this because I just think if you understand, the nature of the climate and nature crisis that we're facing, then we do really need to be supporting our students a little better than currently the curriculum allows. So just consider also signing that if you can. And yeah, so that's all the kind of updates from the Sustainable Schools Network. But I just wanted to start with a little introduction into adaptation and resilience and what they are, and then I'll hand over to Deb in a moment. So what is adaptation and resilience? So I don't know if you've heard of climate mitigation, but these are all the actions that you can take to reduce your emissions. So obviously climate action planning, decarbonisation, that is about climate mitigation. And this is just a general slide. This is not specific to schools, but the types of activities that we want to think about are sustainable transport, or minimising the amount of transport that's happening. We want to use clean energy. We want to have energy efficiency measures. But adaptation is slightly different in that it looks beyond climate change, as in, let's accept that climate change is happening. How can we adapt to cope with the consequences and the risks of climate change? So things that fall under adaptation are disaster management. Now, obviously, as a council, we think about disaster management on an extreme scale, but we do have to think, how will schools face, back in 2022, we had those heat waves, and when I was working in a school, we did actually shut. We had to. Our buildings could not cope with the heat. So I think there was at least 4 lost days then that we had to move up to online learning, and that could, or probably will, happen more often. Maybe it won't be heat waves, maybe it will be flood risk, but the point is our weather is changing. We are going to be facing more extreme weather. So how are we going to make sure we're planning for more days where we maybe can't come into school? How can we keep our schools running? And then, looking at flood risk, is there any way to adapt to flood risk? Can we move students? Can we alter our site to make sure that, short bursts of rainfall don't lead to problems within our grounds? And then we want to think about infrastructure upgrades. And then kind of in the middle here, there's also activities that we can think about which do both. So saving water, obviously that can save you money as well, but very important for both climate mitigation and adaptation. We've got new energy systems, localized food. So in the event that food shortages or food chains are broken, relying on more local food can help us adapt to that. Improving education, so making our students more aware of the risks of climate change, but also understanding how more extreme weather is going to affect them, and then working with the community and adapting our grounds so that they are better to coping in terms of extreme weather and flood risk. So basically, mitigation adaptation increases our resilience to cope with the extreme shocks that might come from the consequences of climate change. So why is it important? Well, we're obviously living in a really fast-paced landscape that's changing all the time. Our environment's changing, our politics are becoming quite extreme in nature and are very changeable, and then we are facing massive advances in technology. So we do need to look ahead and think about how we're going to cope with these changes. We're also facing multiple crises in school, so mental health, school refusal, the SEND crisis, which I'm sure you're all aware of, and there's increasing amounts of misinformation that is coming to our students, but also to staff. So we need to all be really clear on what exactly is happening and how it's going to affect us and our young people. We are increasingly facing budgetary restrictions, and that's going to, everything that we do in terms of climate planning. Obviously, there are some things that are going to cost money. Maybe we can't afford things right now, those extreme changes, but a lot of what we're talking about is about behavior change. So, when we're thinking about adaptation and resilience, are there things that we can do within budget right now? What can we do later on and advocate for funds to make your schools more resilient? And then there's higher expectations. So more and more things are falling on schools um, to look after. So I just wanted to put that in there. Okay, so here's some examples of sort of mitigation and adaptation in schools specifically. So just in terms of mitigation, we want to think about climate change. We want to make sure it's embedded into our curriculum. It is difficult with the current national curriculum, but that is seeing a review. But there is flexibility within the curriculum to make climate change more accessible for our students to discuss and to understand. And then in terms of staff training, are you putting aside time so that staff are understanding what the climate crisis is, what it means for them and their students, and what the nature crisis also means? And then there's also opportunities to develop our site and think about how we can make it greener. But then on the other side, adaptations is things like, facing different weather events. So how can we make our systems more resilient? So I just wanted to highlight that when we're thinking about both of those, the most important thing is that we have a crisis-sensitive educational planning approach. So it does mean we have to change the way we've planned, we have planned before. So we need to be thinking about sustainability with sustainability in mind. Okay, so the top tips, or my top tips for adaptation and resilience is, first of all, to form a sustainability committee. Now, if you're in a small primary school, then obviously you don't have a huge team, but in larger secondary schools, you really need to think about those key players that you need to get around the table. People like the site managers, operational managers, the curriculum leads, the careers lead, and someone from SLT and the governing body. You want all of those decision makers to be coming together and talking about how climate change and nature crisis are going to be affecting you. Road mapping. So sometimes schools get so when they do engage with sustainability, lots of people have lots of ideas and it can become quite overwhelming because you don't really know where to put everything. But creating a roadmap and saying, look, some things we are going to have to park, some things are going to require money, but some things do just mean let's change the way we behave, or let's advocate for more change from our parental body or something like that. So road mapping just allows you to think, right, is this something we can do now? Is it something we can do maybe next year? Is it something that we need to wait for? CPD for teachers, just thinking about whether you've got a baseline of knowledge amongst your school staff. Climate literacy is a really good example. Does everybody understand what net zero means, for example? Does everybody understand what adaptation is? Maybe there's an opportunity to sit around and increase the carbon literacy amongst your staff. And student voice, it's really powerful. You need to know how your students are feeling about this, but also they are a strong advocates for change. So really listen to them within your climate action planning. And then community engagement. You've got lots of people around the school and engaged in school, particularly parents and governors. Can they support you in what you want to achieve? So that was a little sort of overview of adaptation and resilience from me. I'm going to hand over to Deborah now. Hopefully there's no questions. But yes, Deborah from RAF. So I'm going to stop presenting. And now I can see you all. Hello. And I'll hand over to you, Deb.
Yeah, hi everybody, and thank you very much for having me and also my colleague Lily, who is also here. I'm going to give kind of a whistle-stop tour, a bit of what we do and a bit of things we find at schools, and I think it aligns really nicely actually with some of the things that have just been discussed in terms of kind of engagement, community, and all those bits. But I'm going to apologise now because I'd love to talk to you for like an hour and I'm trying to squeeze a lot into 15 minutes. So I'll kind of rapidly hop through things. But yeah, I hope that you sort of enjoy and get something out of it. So first up is who is Raft for context. We are an architecture-led multidisciplinary practice. We concentrate on retrofit of schools, but also kind of equally important to that is the education around sustainability and retrofit. So in our team, we don't just have kind of architects and architectural assistants, we also have a former teacher and Lily, our engagement lead. So it's such a core part of what we do. And then I suspect because you're all in this network that you know what retrofit is, but just to make sure we're starting from a kind of everybody having the same understanding footing. So we say building retrofit, could also be termed thermal energy upgrade. It's a set of measures and they can be physical, like insulation, or operational, maybe like some of the tweaks you might do through energy sparks that Rebecca mentioned. And they can combine to, reduce bills, improve comfort, improve well-being, or reduce energy use generally. Also making more resilient. And then deep retrofit is where we're looking at a building in a really holistic way, and we are reducing the consumption sometimes by up to 60 to 70%, depending on what type of building is it and what opportunities there are generally. And probably the key word to take away from today for everybody, for me, would be holistic, just kind of thinking about a building as a whole system and not just as bits and pieces that can be retrofitted. So a little bit of context is retrofit is very much our lives at Raft. This is my director's home, and you can see he's mid retrofit there with one of the first passive house and the fifth step-by-step retrofits in the UK. So we kind of live it, breathe it, and are hugely passionate about it. So something else we're really passionate about is retrofit communication, because I think it's easy for things to get technical and feel difficult. And again, bringing people along is really important. So we're developing these sort of comic strips as part of a soon-to-be published book about home retrofit. Though I will say that our focus is schools, but obviously homes relate to more of the population, so hence the focus there. But you see in that kind of page that, there's air quality, there's mold, there's damp, there's comfort, there's cold. It's not just sustainability, and although sustainability is hugely important, it's really easy to get caught up in just the kilowatt hours and not the co-benefits, including, climate, comfort, and those other things. Something else we're really passionate about is understanding that buildings have layers. These are kind of two identical terraces represented. One used as it might be used as the path, where perhaps most of the moisture use is outside the building in the outhouse, whereas now we're using buildings very differently for how we might have been when they were constructed. And then I've also had lots of changes and layers of change. So getting to know buildings, really understanding them, because that changes how they might kind of deal with and respond to measures and what opportunities might be there for taking. Something else, again, banging on about my favorite word, holistic. In the context of this, it's about having a whole house plan. In the context of a school, it would be having a whole school plan. So really looking through, having a sense of, the context, any existing defects, the energy bills data before any changes and after any changes, kind of detailed surveys and analysis, and just really knowing a building and knowing where the opportunities might lie. And again, we're very passionate about looking at a whole building rather than just looking kind of bits and pieces to make sure that we're being holistic. So something else linking more to the adaptation and resilience is a kind of the co-benefits of retrofit. And sometimes it might be simple of this building on the right. This is, Ralph's Dream Street, where people are retrofitting, they're maintaining their character and personality of these buildings. And they're also increasing their climate adaptation. You've got shading from either shades or from trees. You've got kind of the co-benefit of green careers and knowledge, improved comfort, all of those things that kind of go together alongside the pure technical dry aspect of retrofit. So in terms of what we do, you've kind of gathered building retrofit, a huge amount of community engagement, and then research on net zero carbon and other bits. And I'll go relatively fast through this, but kind of in line with that is kind of, we think to have a huge amount of impact, we want to have our fingers in quite a lot of these pies. So I'm just gonna mute someone there, and make sure that kind of, large reach. So that reach might be helping an estate, for example, a local council or a diocese plan across their whole estate, how they might approach schools, where the funding opportunities might be, to looking at individual schools, or it might be developing guidance for an organisation that's more kind of generically spread. So skipping on here, we're also at the moment in the midst of our low carbon skills fund preparation. I don't know if anybody's come across that or aware of it, but it's the government funding for kind of decarbonisation planning, and that's probably announced fairly soon. And we're also on site with a couple of projects where we've got funding through with schools, and yeah, really happy that they're very almost complete, and yeah, just lovely to see projects happening, retrofits happening at schools. So sorts of things we find at schools. One thing is that, schools can be quite complicated, and there's lots of different construction types, and we want to kind of analyze them, think about them, and identify them all together. And obviously some schools are much more simple, but it's just starting with a base point of understanding the buildings is hugely important. When we're looking at buildings, things we might find can be quite surprising. This is a school that was built in 2011. When we had a look at it, we found that there was no insulation in the walls at all. So immediately there's a great opportunity there for cavity wall insulation. Little but coming up is that when we have a look at the cavity, we can see that at the bottom it's full of rubble. So thinking holistically, we need to make sure that that full cavity is checked out. It's all clean and clear before any retrofit can happen, to make sure that the insulation doesn't mix with the rubble and it acts as we would want. Oh, I didn't realize that was a video. There we go. And another image, this is an image of a wall being repointed. And this is representing the fact that buildings need to be retrofit ready. So you want buildings to be in good condition, and particularly rainwater goods and pointing, to make sure that they're not using more energy than they already should. And that if you are considering any retrofit measures to walls, that your building is kind of resilient and able to take those and accommodate those. Another interesting finding at schools is kind of maybe where I'd say know your buildings and make sure you keep knowing your buildings, because this was a ceiling where blue is cold, red is hot. And according to the school, this ceiling was insulated, and they were partially right, except at some point in time, somebody or somebodies have been up into that ceiling and needed access and messed with the insulation. So a really easy win for this ceiling is for the insulation to be tidied up, assuming obviously that there's safe access. So sometimes you might think one thing about a school building, but actually in a space that's not accessed very much, you might occasionally be surprised. Another surprise here was a new building, which was built, I think, in 2018, where when Raft had a look, there was no insulation in the ceiling at all. What was fantastic about this is that the building was still within its defect period, so it was caught and identified, and the builder had to come and add the insulation in. But I think it's just knowing your buildings is really, really key, I think, is the message there. Then something else that we like to talk about is evidence-led approach, and this relates to co-benefits of retrofit. And this is an air quality graph, and in this graph you see that the air quality was over the recommended kind of pollutants levels for over 5 hours a day in a classroom. And that's a really common thing, and retrofit actually is a great trigger point for dealing with those sorts of issues, or vice versa. And so in this instance, actually, they were able to evidence the kind of the poor air quality and the effects on learning, and were able to get a particular type of ventilation put in, mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, which also saves the heat. And the head teacher there is really passionate about the impact on learning that it's had on those students. So for us, like, you know, sustainability is massive, but learning environment is also massive, and we don't want to kind of divorce the two from each other. Another little observation that was made at a school, and lots of schools, is radiators. And this is just a lovely case of kind of the opportunity that occasionally comes with decarbonisation. So this was a school where the radiators were 120 years old. They were not in great condition, and the school got funding to get a heat pump. But obviously, heat pumps need really good radiators and often need larger radiators. And rather than replace all the radiators, the school managed to get public sector funding to get their radiators refurbished, and then just a few additional radiators. So these are their 120-year-old radiators, maintaining that character of the school, not wasting any material, and kind of, you know, the school looking a lot better than it had in the long term. So that kind of co-benefit of retrofit and making sure that the heat pump would work with it, and that's a real joy to us. And then in terms of kind of people and joy, very much echoing Rebecca, is pupils engage so fantastically with their buildings, as I'm sure you'll know from all of your schools. This is from a Follow the Heat workshop at a primary school, and even just getting them into the boiler rooms where safe to do so is fantastic. Getting them to really understand the ecosystem of fuel and heat and machinery, and think about where it comes from. And it's just a massive learning opportunity that we think those sorts of little kind of real connections will stick with those children for a long time, because they'll be really memorable days, and so hugely passionate about it. This one makes me laugh. It's children doing a waste audit at a school, and you'll notice an apple. And if you're very eagle-eyed, you'll also notice that all of the pupils have written apple at the top of their list, because they were all outraged that the apple was in the wrong bin. And this links again to that kind of power that you all have as schools, and that network factor. And this is an image of a different school, but a similar scenario where pupils found out during one of their waste audits that they didn't have any food recycling at their school from the council. They wrote to the council with a very passionate teacher who helped them, and now all schools in their areas have access to food waste recycling. So, you know, it seems like it's a half-hour lesson, but no, it's not a half-hour lesson. They go home, they're passionate, and they do sometimes make change, and it's really empowering for them to see that. Something else is just getting hands-on with pupils, and particularly if we are looking at retrofitting a school, making sure that it's used as a learning opportunity for the pupils as well. So this was part of the baked potato challenge, where pupils make a house for their baked potatoes, and there's a bit of a competition as to whose potato can lose the less heat. And obviously there's a huge amount of learning to do with building physics and heat and temperature and units of energy. Lots of links to the curriculum there. And again, like Rebecca was saying with that campaign, is bringing in as much as possible is fantastic. And on learning, we are really passionate, and again, this links to your training days, about premises manager and senior leadership manager training. And we've been running it, and it sounds like you actually probably already do, but we really encourage you to make sure that premises managers, caretakers are included in any training and things, because they are the guardians of heat and energy at the school, and they are often really motivated, and they often really want to sit in a room with the SLT to kind of talk about plans and to buy into the plans. And probably my main takeaway from these sessions is actually also the value that they got from training and the sense of belonging that often premises managers are a little bit in their own silo and feel a bit disconnected. And so just involving them in sustainability-based planning and training is huge. And if you do end up retrofitting a school, they are one of the absolute most valuable key players. So very conscious of time. So I might skip over these. These are a few other bits you probably get a sense from the images. And last up, I'm just going to skip forward to something that we're working on at the moment. And we are, you've probably gathered, but we are super passionate to sort of reach as many schools as possible and to help schools really think holistically about their buildings. And so we're developing an online tool called the Zero Carbon Action Planner. And the idea of it is that it's a tool to help schools, particularly, well, schools that know their building well, but also schools that don't have an equivalent kind of support of some professionals to start really getting to know their building. Because the questions that I imagine everybody asks a lot is, where do we start? How do we decide which actions to take? How do we know what the risk points are? And so the idea with this is that it's an online tool where you can put in quite a detailed building audit. It helps you to understand your school buildings. Again, some schools have a really good understanding of their school buildings already, some schools less so. And then it basically develops from whatever inputs you put about your school. It develops a kind of school-specific action plan, although obviously, it doesn't know your buildings well, but it suggests actions that are likely to be applicable to your school, can identify some funding avenues. It will also have some teaching resources. And then one of the main things is the sharing and engaging in that community power, the PESTA power, and that kind of reaching lots of people. And tracking. And I'd say on tracking, I suspect anybody in this network already does, but I know, Rebecca, you mentioned Energy Sparks earlier, and we think they're fantastic. But really encourage you to track your energy now, but also if you do make changes, really keep tracking your energy and kind of keep understanding and use it to motivate you to do more. And conscious that I'm probably about 30 seconds over and I've gone at breakneck speed, but I hope that was useful, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much. We just have one question. So was it a thermal camera on a phone, those photos?
Yeah, I think that one was. I think that was from memory, that one was actually before my time. That was when you could get these little cameras that plug into iPhones. I have a feeling that because the socket on iPhones have changed, I'm not sure they're currently available. But they're called FLIR, those particular ones. But
So I've actually got one. I work. I'm on the climate action group for my parish council, and we go out and we've been surveying houses using those cameras. They are really cool, and you can take pictures on your phone and then send the pictures to the people, to let them know where they need to perhaps do some work. So and I don't have an iPhone. I've just got a basic Android.
Fantastic. It's FLIR. Rosie. And just to say what's lovely about them, and I shouldn't take any more time, is sometimes they take pictures of things you already know, and it's evidencing the things that you know perfectly well about your building. Anyway, I'll be quiet now because I'm aware you've got a lot to fill in.
Thank you. Thanks, Deb. Okay. Yeah, we are running a bit short on time, so I'm going to hand straight over to Holly from ThoughtBox. Thank you so much for joining us, Holly.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me. I will just share my screen. And yes, I'll also try and whistle stop tour through 15 minutes of content as quickly as I can. Is my screen sharing?
Not yet.
Not yet, no.
Okay, interesting. You can tell I'm not normally a Teams person. Try again.
Yes.
Any luck?
It's working now, yes.
Fantastic. Okay. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction to who I am, who Thoughtbox is, who I work for. Thoughtbox is an organisation run by myself and my co-director Rachel Musson. We're both former teachers who both actually taught English at secondary school, and now we work to support educators around the practices and the ideas behind people care, earth care and self-care, and I'll go into more detail with that as we go on. But there are just that we tend to focus on 3 different areas of resourcing, supporting and enabling, and that's looking at how we can support with personal practice and really thinking about habit building and self-sustaining practice. We know from that first-hand experience what it's like to be a teacher and how much overwhelm and how much work that can be. We also look at supporting with professional practice, so what it looks like in the classroom to really be talking about these topical issues around and the crises that we're facing in our world. And we also look at connecting and empowering leaders to really start thinking about how we can change and shape organizational and systemic practices too. But for today, I'm just going to be really starting to focus a little bit on those first 2 and thinking about our personal practice and professional practice in schools. Just to give us a little bit of scene setting, and apologies in advance for this, but it's important for us to realize that at the moment, and I think most of us do, at least on some level, that our world is not very well right now. And these are just some of the headlines from BBC News over the last couple of days and weeks that we are facing. And if you are like me and like many people, you might even find yourself reading this on a daily basis. Maybe even the first thing you read when you wake up is switching on the news and exposing ourselves to this level of ill health that is dominant across all sorts of parts, all across the world and in lots of different contexts. If we're to kind of map these symptoms and group them, we can start to see patterns emerging. We can see that there are rising levels of personal ill health happening all across the world, with growing levels of physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional illness. We're also seeing rising levels of social ill health too, with inequality and fragmentation across multiple communities, both on a small and a large scale. And as all of you are aware, we're also seeing rising levels of environmental ill health too, and an increasing climate and biodiversity crisis. Now, our response to that can be to feel a greater sense of overwhelm, and particularly when we start to see these as what is known as the polycrisis, this idea that there are multiple overwhelming crises continually happening that we are being bombarded with and that we are having to face, and thus students and young people that we're working with are facing too. Now, that can be quite difficult and unwieldy to hold. And it's important that we recognize the emotional struggles of that, and we'll come back to that in a bit. But one thing that Rachel and myself find reassuring in an odd way is, rather than considering these symptoms as symptoms of a polycrisis, really digging back down even further into these patterns and seeing what is happening is actually not necessarily just a polycrisis, but actually a metacrisis. That when we really start to look at what's happening, we can see that all of it is connected to one underpinning crisis behind it all. And when we start to think in those terms, then we start to be able to empower ourselves to actually do something about it. So when I'm talking about the metacrisis here, this one underpinning crisis, what we talk about at Thoughtbox is actually this crisis of connection. And at the root of all of our collective ill health is increasing disconnection from each other, increased disconnection from nature, and increased disconnection from ourselves. And these perpetuate each other. So none of this can happen in isolation. We find that actually what affects one part affects the whole. So the more unwell we become in ourselves, the more unwell we become in society, and the less able we are to support each other. And the less well our societies are, the less capacity we have to look after the environment around us. And the less we care for the environment around us, the more ill we become. And we can see this cycle perpetuating and going forward. The good news about this is that the opposite is true too, that actually what affects one part affects the whole. So particularly when we're coming at this from a sustainability angle and we're thinking about what we can do as sustainability leads in schools, or really starting to bring sustainability into schools, is acknowledging the fact that sustainability doesn't exist in isolation either. That actually our own well-being is connected to the well-being of others, and the well-being of others is connected to the well-being of the earth. And that the more that we can do in any of these sectors to really start to care for ourselves, care for each other, care for the world around us, we start to create this really positive feedback loop, which helps all of us to thrive. So not just our natural spaces in our school and the natural spaces beyond our schools, but also the school community can begin to thrive, and we ourselves can begin to thrive, which is something that is so crucial in our school system at the moment, where we're seeing huge levels of burnout and dropout from teachers and educators. So bearing this in mind and really thinking about the topic around how we can start to look after ourselves in the face of the climate crisis, is really understanding the fact that this climate crisis that we are in is also a well-being crisis. That we can't just teach about climate change, but it needs to be something that we process together. And that is both as the educators and our young people and our staff as well. And it was really interesting, Deborah mentioning the kind of the support staff that are behind the scenes too, also often feeling disconnected from these kind of conversations. But actually, when we can start to think about processing together, that's where we really start to make a difference. We're not immune from the emotional distress either. So when we are talking to our students and our young people about what is happening in the world, we have to acknowledge the fact that this is affecting us. And it's important to admit that as well, and not to sort of bring them down with the weight of our own woes, but just to meet everyone in these conversations as human beings and acknowledge that actually this is a complicated thing and we don't all know the answers to it, but we can do what we can, and we can feel the feelings that we're feeling without trying to sort of repress them. One thing that I think is important to acknowledge in this space, and Thoughtbox are not the only people that talk about this, that actually we're so often used to framing this concern about the planet as eco-anxiety, and we see it a lot in our young people. They're experiencing eco-anxiety. Actually, when you start to think about this idea of connection and disconnection, that what we're experiencing is less about anxiety in ourselves, but it's about empathy for the natural world and a deep understanding and compassion for what is happening to the planet that we are a part of. It starts to shift that rather than thinking of it as something that we need to be stopping or something that we need to be in some way curing or preventing, when we look at that reaction as eco-empathy, it's actually something to be encouraging and really thinking about, okay, well, how can we take that concern and turn it into action? So rather than trying to shut down any concerns, it's thinking, okay, acknowledging that concern is valid and understandable, and that there's something that we can and should be doing with that instead. It's just a shift in the way that we start to frame it that can make a really big difference. And what we've found is that, and not just us, but what the research shows is that talking together is one of the most powerful ways to shift from that anxiety to empowerment. So again, rather than squashing down any conversations, and there are studies out there that show that almost half of young people feel that when they've wanted to talk about the climate and nature crisis, they've been shut off or ignored by people in their school. Instead of shutting them off, actually allowing them space to talk gives a really strong ability and empowerment to actually make a difference. I want to just dive now really quickly, again, a whistle-stop tour into our nervous system, and really starting to think about what's happening to us when we are confronted with that news that I showed earlier of that ill health that is affecting us personally, socially, and environmentally. And it's having a big impact on our nervous system. Many of you will have heard of the fight or flight response, but for me anyway, I'm relatively new to the vagus nerve, which is now my favorite nerve in the body. That's a ridiculous thing to say, but it really is. The vagus nerve is called the vagus nerve, which comes from the Latin for wanderer, and it's called the wanderer because it actually travels all around our body, starting at the base of our brainstem and impacting all sorts of different functions that we have in our body, from our sort of our mood into our speech, our heart rate, our breathing, our digestion. And its role is to really help us to meet stress and meet kind of things that might cause us harm, and also to help us to regulate once we have kind of got past stresses. Now, bearing that in mind, that our vagus nerve regulates those threat responses and it also helps us to calm us down. One way in which some neuroscientists kind of illustrate that functionality and that way of engaging with the world is through this idea of an autonomic ladder. So when we look at the autonomic ladder, it's got 3 phases that we find ourselves going into when we are around sort of threat. When we're perceiving threat. So the first stage, the ventral vagal stage, is a sense of feeling safe, of being able to connect and engage. And when we find our autonomic system in that state of safety and engagement, of the ventral vagal state, we can feel grounded, we feel social, we feel at ease. When we start to sense more threat levels, and this can often happen even just from reading the news, but also from all sorts of different input, we find ourselves sliding into the sympathetic state. So that's when we start to feel a sense of being in danger, that need to fight or to flee or somehow remove ourselves from the threat. And that can be when we start to feel anxious, we start to feel agitated. And if we find ourselves in that state for too long, we can start to get frantic, this real sense of, I need to get away from what is happening here. The third level down of the autonomic ladder is the dorsal vagal state. And this is one that we sometimes do come across in students who are dealing with the climate crisis. And we often, most of us have found ourselves in each of these 3 states at different points in our lives. But this dorsal vagal state is a real sense of, actually, I cannot cope anymore. I cannot flee or fight this threat. It is happening in a place that I cannot get away from. And so I need to shut down. And when we're in that dorsal vagal state, then we can feel numb, we can feel overwhelmed, and we can feel alone. So that understanding that actually when we sense that danger, our body is working hard to keep us safe. All of this is to keep us safe. Unfortunately, the wiring is a little out of date, and the threats that we perceive in the world right now are not necessarily helped by going into these sympathetic and dorsal vagal states. The reason that the vagus nerve is my favorite nerve in the system, in the body, however, is that actually there's a lot that we can do to really work with our vagus nerve and help us to regulate ourselves, moving up from that dorsal vagal through into sympathetic and back right up into that ventral vagal state. And this is really important to think about when we're thinking about the climate crisis, because as I was saying, actually ill health is in a cycle. Actually, we need to look at how we can look after ourselves and really regulate and help our students and young people to regulate in the face of global crises. And when we do that, we're actually more equipped to be able to make more choices that help to empower the world. So our responses may be unconscious, like we say, that actually they are coming from a place that was developed thousands, millions of years ago. But actually we can start to regulate and soothe and even rewire our responses. And there are several ways that we can do that. And there are just a couple here that I'll run through. Things like mindful breathing, singing and humming, stretching our bodies, talking and connecting with others, hugging, laughing, spending time in natural spaces, cold water exposure for people that can face it, and being around other animals and plants. And this is really important, again, when we're thinking about how we can look after ourselves, look after our colleagues, look after our students. When we're talking about sustainability, all of these things can be integrated into our classrooms in different ways, in smaller or larger amounts, maybe not the cold water exposure, but most other things at some point can be integrated into the school day. And they really do make a difference to what is actually going on with our own biology and our own responses in our bodies. Now, I've grouped these into 3 categories here because actually, if you boil this down again, and we like to kind of find the patterns at Thoughtbox, it's all about connection or reconnection with ourselves, with others, with the natural world. And that's the easiest way that we can do that is through self-care, really connecting with ourselves through looking after ourselves, people care, thinking about how we can build caring communities, and earth care as well. So really considering how we can care for the planet. And in doing each of these, any of these sort of care activities, we really start to build that connection, and we strengthen our ability to then continue to care and care more for the people around us and for the world around us. And we call this triple well-being at Thoughtbox, and it's holistic, and it's the way that we can be well together rather than simply focusing on one element or thinking of things in their silos, that actually we start to really consider the fact that everything is interrelated, that we cannot care for the planet unless we are well in ourselves, and we cannot be well in ourselves unless we're part of communities that are well. You know, the system cannot be well if its parts are unwell. So really starting to understand our place in a wider holistic whole. One of my favorite quotes, and as I say, I'm a former English teacher, so I cannot help but put quotes into every presentation I give. But this quote is attributed to both Llewellyn Vaughan Lee and Thich Nhat Hanh, who says, "The world is not a problem to be solved. It is a living being to which we belong." And if you come away from today with nothing else in mind, I would really urge you to start to think about, we have, particularly as educators, this desire often to solve a problem or to give an answer that is the right answer, and particularly the way that our exam system is kind of built at the moment. There is a problem that often needs to be solved, and it's accurate or not. But actually, we need to start really seeing ourselves as part of something that is a living being, and that we belong to that. So rather than solving something, really starting to see how can we create more connection? How can we really start to allow ourselves, our students, our colleagues, and our communities to build more connections between themselves, each other, and the natural world. And just to end, I just wanted to share that at Thoughtbox, we have several different ways in which we support educators and teachers. We have training programs that really kind of dive into our triple wellbeing model, which looks at self-care, people care, and earth care through the entry points of the head, the heart, and the hands. We have triple wellbeing resources. So you can see here pictures of our story kits, which are these beautiful illustrated books, which tell stories of self-care, earth care, and people care through woodland creatures. And we also have card practices as well that can be used. They're 5 to 10 minute practices that can be used in classrooms or in meetings or wherever you want to be thinking about boosting well-being. And then finally, we have a global community of practice that we work with too. So over 1,000 educators who are part of our online hub, who come together to talk about what's going on for them and support each other. So that's me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Holly. That was lovely. Thanks. Does anyone have, I haven't had any questions in the chat. Does anyone urgently want to ask Holly anything before? No? Okay, lovely. I just want to check in with Luciana. Have you got time to do your presentation, Luciana?
Yes. Do you need, like, if we got another half an hour,
No,
do you need the
that's
whole
fine.
half
If
an
you're,
hour for?
yeah, no, that's fine. If you, I think it's more important that we get the presentations done. So yeah, if you're happy to go now, we can hand over to you. So thanks, Holly, and I'll pass over to Luciana.
So I'll keep it brief, and then the idea was to be a bit more interactive as well, so we can like use as like more a discussion point as well, the presentation, instead of just me present. Oh, okay. I thought it was a question to Holly, so I will share my slide. So I'm just going to go back to the beginning. Right. So thanks, Rebecca, for inviting me here today, and thanks for the other presenters as well. Some really interesting presentations today. I am part of Let's Go Zero. We work together with many charities in the sector. So we work with RAFT on many other initiatives as well. So Let's Go Zero is a national campaign. If you don't know about us already, we campaign for net zero in schools. We've got more than 5,500 actually schools that are already signed up for their campaign, and that's the QR code if you want to join us if you haven't already. We work, like I said, collaboratively with many charities in the sector and other organizations, with councils, with the government sustainability programs such as the National Education Nature Park, the Climate Ambassadors, and we signpost schools to all these resources. So one of the, my role in the Let's Go Zero campaign, I am part of a team called the Climate Action Advisors. So this is a network of experts to help schools to become zero carbon. We feel that there's quite a lot out there for schools on sustainability. So we created this program to really help schools to go through this journey, to signpost them to the resources that might be more helpful to them, to help you to calculate your carbon impact, to find the funding and the resources. And we do this for free. We don't charge for this advice. And we have a team across England. I am part of the East of England team. I advise schools in Suffolk, Essex, and Cambridgeshire. And there's other colleagues working in other regions as well. So as a network, we've got a lot of expertise in the team. We've got people that used to be teachers, head teachers, and I used to work for the council in Essex. And there's a range of expertise in the team to help schools to navigate this journey and to meet the expectations of the Department of Education that all schools need to have a sustainability lead and a climate action plan in place by 2025. So they've been kind of recommending that schools have got a climate action plan in place by next school year. So if you have already started, or if you don't know where to start, and if you want some help in starting your climate action plan, we are here to support. The QR code in this page is to signpost to our advisor support, and then we will get in touch and book a meeting. So this is just to remind what the recommendation was in regards to climate action plan. So the DFE said he would like to see the climate action plans to contain 4 kind of sections, and one is the decarbonization, which a lot of what retrofit and energy that you heard from Raft, biodiversity as well, which I understand is your next network meeting, and climate education and careers. And today, Rebecca was talking to you about adaptation and resilience, and I've got a few actions that we usually discuss with schools in regards to climate action plan. So a climate action plan ideally has all these sections, and we help schools to think about what kind of actions you might want to include in each of these in your climate action plan. Rebecca already brilliantly talked to you about adaptation and resilience, so I won't spend time reminding you again of the benefits, but just to give you this, I think this kind of give you a little bit of like reminder what we need to adapt for, what we need to be resilient for. So just the impact that we can expect in the UK in regards the winters being warmer, winters being wetter, summers being hotter, and things like that. Just so it kind of breaks down in kind of 3 main risks for schools, which we try to advise the schools on, and just to come up with suggestions, some really easy suggestions and some a bit more complicated. Some are low cost, some need some investment. So I just wanted to go through a few of them, and then maybe perhaps we can have just use the chat just like you already here, we are already talking about adaptation. So maybe you want to put your school name on the chat, and then if you connect with any of these suggestions, maybe say, oh, I will look into this. It'd be brilliant to hear a bit more about the people in the schools present here today and what kind of actions they are already doing, maybe, or actions that they might want to consider for their school. Right. So starting with water risk. These are some of the kind of the actions that we talk to schools about. So checking for, so it's all about conserving water and using less water. So perhaps you want to check whether your school have got any leaks. You want to involve students in a water audit, and then I always signpost schools in the East to the England Water Pack, which has got a brilliant audit pack, and they are able to do education sessions as well with schools. Perhaps you want to use these resources to raise awareness with students and staff, and perhaps you've got some funding actually to go around decide the chain, like, or you just want to consider, like, next time that we need to change a tap, can we do something a bit different? Can we put a push tap so that we are helping to conserve water by not having a running water? And then another resource which we signpost to, apart from the England Water Pack, the ones from this charity called Water Aid, which talks more about water conservation and access to water in the world. And they've got some really lovely lesson plans as well. So if you go, I'll skip to the next risk, but if you want to think about something water related that you might be doing already in your school, or you want, like, you liked one of the suggestions, you think, oh, I want to do that, if you want to put in the chat, and then you can use that as part of your networking discussion. Flood risk. So what kind of things we advise schools in regards to flood risk? To consider measures to implement sustainable urban drainage systems. So that's to reduce perhaps flooding in the community. To check your gutter cleaning rota to make sure it's being cleaned regularly. That's something that actually schools are quite good already doing it, but we always have that as a reminder as well. And just to look at what's your local risk, because that's one thing that perhaps schools haven't thought about. What is the flood risk in your area? And if the school is not at risk of flooding, is it the area surrounding the school at risk of flooding, and what is the impact of that in the school operations? Like I talked to at least 2 schools recently where the school is not at risk of flooding, but the community around is. So, like, how do you account for that with your operations? What kind of plans you need to put in place? It's all about preparing, like Rebecca said at the beginning. And I'm signposting to a film also by Anglia Water about sustainable drainage systems, which can be very, very useful for talking to students as well about that. And the last one I want to talk to you about, heating. So one of the things we recommend schools doing as well, like, can you go around the site and do a little bit of an audit, looking which rooms are quite hot, and then flagging that and thinking about what kind of measures could be implemented. So some blinds, some films, if you've got the funding to do that. Also thinking about the playgrounds, like, can you build shelters? Can you consider planting to create more shade in the playground for the days that are really hot? Do you know if staff knows how to keep the room cool in the case of a very like hot day? Do they know, like, some cross ventilation measures to be able to keep the room cool the best way they can? And then some resources there that we signposting as well, such as a heat alert from the UK government that can be helpful, so you know about these kind of very hot days in advance. And also the joint union heatwave protocol with some suggestions as well about releasing some uniform requirements and things like that. So there's just some of the resources as a climate action advisor that I talk to schools about when we are helping them to write their climate action plans. I haven't looked at the chat to see if anyone was considering any of these suggestions. And
we have someone asking a question, or Chris is asking about some ponds, drainage ponds. Don't know if you can see that, Luciana. Shall I read it to you?
Yeah, yes, please, because I cannot see the chat when I'm presenting.
I think that's.
I don't mind speaking.
Oh yeah, there you go. You can speak. Go for
But no,
it.
is that all right? Yeah, no.
Sorry.
So everything's been fantastic, but thank you for that. So yeah, so I think drainage ponds, we've got 2 of them. I'd welcome advice and guidance how to help the newer one establish better. It's just kind of left on its own. You can see saplings starting to grow and rise through, and no one quite knows whether that's a good thing in terms of diversity and the environment. It probably is, but does that affect it? So I'd welcome a contact about how to make best use of that space.
So you've got already 2. Is that what you said, Chris?
Yeah. So we've got one that's probably about 50, 60 years old. It's got trees in, it's sometimes mud, it's sometimes water, it's got a deer in it, and it's just beautiful. Whereas the more modern one is close to the middle of the playing field, and you just think, I'm like, well, okay, 8, 9 years on, what's the best practice for this to serve its purpose in case of flooding, but also to be a useful environment for wildlife?
Yeah, yeah. So if you would like to signpost to our support, we can have a look and see what kind of organizations might be able to help with that. Yeah, I'll be happy to look into it. What's your school, Chris?
Thomas Gainsborough School. We're just south of Sudbury in a village called Great Cornard.
Okay. Thank you for that. Anyone else would like to share what they are already doing in regards to adaptation? Any kind of measures? I've got a slide with all of the actions in one place. So if anyone would like to talk about any actions they are already doing or actions they might want to think about in regards to adaptation. And I don't know how to see the chat and present at the same time. So you're going to have to flag any messages, Rebecca.
Yeah, so we've got a question about, Louisa, can you just look up on the chat? I'm going to read out this last one from Rosie. So we'd like to know about funding for water butts, etc. There's no money.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I have to be honest. Some biodiversity funds will also fund water butts. Like if you are looking to do some other work, then you might be able to get the water butts as part of a package with like nature grants and things like that if you are thinking about biodiversity improvements as well. If you put your contact details in the chat, I can try to see if I can find something specific for your school. Depending on where your school is, then there's a specific grant schemes available. So I'm happy. But the one that comes to mind quickly now, the local nature grant might be able to fund. I'll put in the chat once I stop presenting. That one is there's still some. It's £500.
Yeah, the other thing is to I mean, I know you can't tap up the parental body for everything, but in terms of community, you could put a message out to the local community to see if anybody wants, there's often gardening groups that would really like to support that kind of thing within schools. So I would consider trying to send a message out to the local community and seeing if they can support something like that. Yeah. Was there anything else on the chat, Louisa?
There was a request for a link to the joint union heatwave protocol.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I'll
Luciana,
put that
if you-
in the chat.
That'd be
Yeah.
brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Luciana. I think, well, we've got 15 minutes. I thought it might be nice to just get out into breakout rooms just for a little while, just to have a chat, digest what you've kind of heard, because there's quite a lot there. So I'm just going to share some questions, and you can choose one or two, and just have a think about them. Let's and maybe choose something to talk about within your group. So how has climate change or biodiversity loss affected your school? So have you seen any direct impacts? What other challenges is your school facing? Obviously we're talking about sustainability today, but has anything else been kind of triggered through the discussions that we've had? Have you explored adaptation measures for your school already, such as retrofit, sustainable drainage systems, or localised food? Sorry for the typo. How could sustainability informed planning help make your school more resilient? So, what kind of meetings are you having? Could you have a more sustainable focused, planning discussion? How could you better support your students' mental health and well-being during difficult times? So just thinking back to Holly's presentation, is there something there that could support you?